Okay, so today it's a technical day, and this is gonna go up. And I have been on the internet for a while, and there are a lot of people out there who now have this kiln. Okay, they have this kiln. They have taken on and gotten into this great hobby, and then some people want to turn it into a career. And they go out and they get a used one of these, and they don't know how to use it properly. And that is frustrating because they will go and they will do all of these things, and then their pots don't come out the way they want to, or their pots leak, or the glazes aren't right. So I'm going to give you a little rundown on how to use one of these older kilns. There's a lot of misinformation that goes on out there, and a lot of people thinking it's like a giant microwave. They can just set it and forget it. It's not made by Ron Popeil, people. You can't set this and forget it. You have to do things. You have to do maintenance on them. You have to know how to use them properly. And hopefully this little video will give you a little rundown on how to do things. The very first thing that you want to do with any kiln, anytime that you fire it, is you want to use these. These are called cones. Now, this is a self-supporting cone by Orton. This one is 06, which is what I normally fire my bisqueware to. Now, if you didn't know, the O, the 0 before the number, are the lower ranges. And every time, so this is an 06. This little guy is an 05. This one actually takes more heat to bend than this one is, that is an 06. And you can find the temperature numbers on Orton's website. They have a page that tells you all of what the temperatures are. Generally for a bisque, 06 to 04 is what most people bisque at, and at that temperature it gets off the majority of the gases. It burns off, you get majority of the organic material burned out. Some people like to bisque a little bit lower at 08. Some people like to bisque a little bit higher. It just depends on your clay body and the glazes that you use. Generally though, 06, 04 is the typical range that bisque firing occurs at. Now, if you notice, I have two. I have my self-supporting cone here, which is an 06. This is the temperature that I want it to be when it's done. I want this cone to be bent when my temperature is done. This little cone, this is actually for putting into a cone sitter, which is what this has. This kiln has what is called a cone sitter. To use a cone sitter properly, you actually have to go one cone higher than what you want your final temperature to be. Now, yes, this will turn off the kiln when it bends. And if everything is adjusted correctly, I will be able to have a good 06 firing when this cone bends based upon the sensing rod in here. And we'll look at those in just a minute. But first step, if you purchase a kiln, used kiln, new kiln, doesn't matter. Cone sitter or electric, with a computer on it, such as my big one here that you keep hearing go on and off, go get yourself cones. Now, generally, you want to have the temperature that you're at. You want to have the guide cone, the cone that leads up to that temperature, which in this case would be an 07. I don't have an 07 currently on hand, so I don't have it in there. And a guard temperature cone, which would be an 05 for a bisque firing. And what that does is when you place all three in there, you watch your guard, you watch the lead cone bend down. At that point, you now know you have to continue watching the kiln till this cone bends to the appropriate temperature. And the guard cone is to make sure, if that one starts to bend, you've gone over your temp a little bit. It's time to shut it down. So you would use 3 cones. Now, as you get more experience, you could maybe get that down to 2 cones, or if you want to just use 1 cone to make sure you're getting the right temperature every time, and you are a little bit more on top of always staying out there and watching your cones and understanding temperature and time relationships with them, you can get away with 1 cone. But go get yourself 3 sets of cones. The cone you want to fire at, a cone lower in temperature, and a cone higher in temperature. And use them in every firing. Every firing you should use these cones, because these will tell you fairly certainly what is going on inside the kiln. This little guy doesn't tell me what's going on inside the kiln. It is just bending at a certain temperature. And it's going to bend because there's actually going to be a weight that pushes down on it. There's a little sensing rod right in there. So that's the first thing. Get yourself some cones, okay? Now, I'm going to take this down here and we're going to bring it in and we're going to take a little closer look at it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it here. But if we come down, you're going to see I've got some dials on here. Here is my temperature dial. Now, this is a pretty simple kiln. This is an old Duncan ceramic kiln. I see a lot of these on the internet being sold, being used. It really works fairly simple. It has an off. It's got a little dial put to off. And it has an infinite switch in here with different buttons. Now, generally, most people, I will say, when I'm doing a bisque fire, I will take it, I will go from off, and I'll go to low, and I'll leave it at low for approximately 2 hours. This is a small kiln. I've been dialed this particular model in for a long time, but I'll leave it on low for 2 hours, and then I'll move it to medium for 2 hours, and then I'll move it to high for 2 hours, and then I'll finish off at high fire until my cone is bent, and I'm watching my cones the whole time till my cone is bent or the kiln sitter trips. I always prefer to shut my kiln down before the kiln sitter trips, because at that point I'm shutting it down based upon the bend of my cone. But this is that kiln sitter. Now, first step, always start with it off. Okay, that is the start. You'll see down here, you have this dial, and it's got all these really cool numbers. These numbers are just times. Now it says hours of estimated firing time. You need to know how long your estimated firing time is going to be, and you get that by doing your firings. Now, on this one, this particular kiln runs me about 6 hours or so. Usually once I get to the high after 2 hours and I move it up to the high fire, it's within 10 to 15 minutes that my cone is bent to the appropriate temperature, and I can go ahead and shut my kiln down. So I would come here and I would set it for, well, if I estimate it's going to take 6, I might go ahead and give myself a little extra time and go up to 8. This is going to shut the kiln down at 8, okay? So if something happens and I get pulled away or something, I know it's going to shut down at 8. It may be overfired, but it won't have melted my clay body. It wouldn't have self-destructed my kiln in any fashion. But this is, again, just a timer to set it down. You have to give yourself that estimated time. If you're like, my kiln takes 6 hours, set it for 6.5 or 7 hours, and come back. This will just dial down as the kiln's running. It just dials on down, and then it shuts off. This is not the time that it takes to actually get to the appropriate temperature based on the kiln. I mean, you could set this for 18 hours and maybe never reach temperature if you don't adjust it properly. But this is, again, a backup. This is a backup so that you do not overfire your kiln. It is not like setting your microwave and go, oh, I want to cook my pizza I want to heat it up for 30 seconds, and I know it. No, this is just a backup for when you don't get out here to turn it off. That is the same thing as this sitter. Now, to actually make one of these work, you have this little kiln sitter. This is a lever. When this lever drops, it actually disengages this button. Now, if we open up the kiln, we'll come over here, we'll bring this back up. We will move our cones. We'll open up the kiln, and you'll see it's a fairly small kiln. It's pretty clean. It's got a little bit of dirt in the bottom there. I got to vacuum it out again. Always vacuum out your kilns. But if we come down here, you will see that we have a lever. And actually, I still have a cone in there from when I did my firing before. So we'll pull that one out and we'll take a look at it. Now, this is a bar. This is not a cone, but this one is a bar. This was, I believe this one is a, oh, I can't even see my number anymore on here. This is also an 06 bar, okay? Now, you can get these small ones in bars, or you can get them in cones. I prefer the bar generally because it is even. There's no sliding one way or the other. But if you go with the cone type, I always place it so that my number, if you look at it, it has a proper way that it needs to sit and bend. So it's going to want to bend that direction. Now, if you read the instruction manuals, they will tell you to take this cone and to set it so that the number is facing down in your cone sitter. And that is this little guy right here. And it's actually pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and hold my lever up. And then I'm going to lift that. And I'm going to slide it in. Now, I slide mine so that they sit towards the back. But you're going to find that because it's a cone, it's a triangle shape, which is the reason why I don't like them as much, is that you can move it back and forth. Now, some people like that because they get the adjustment they want. I like to set mine right about in the middle if I have to use those instead of the bars. And now, come back out over here, you'll see that my lever is held up. When that cone bends, and it's going to bend into a U shape, this lever drops, and this button will come undone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn everything off, and to turn my, now if you notice, I turned my switch, my light doesn't come on, there's no sounds coming out of the kiln. That's because there's no power getting to it. To get power to it with this kiln sitter, is I've got to now push in, let's see, well, it won't push in because my timer is off. So what I need to do is I need to set my estimated time. We're going to set it for 8. And now my button is locked in place. Once that button's locked in place, I can come over here and I can go ahead and you now see my light has come on, which means my elements that are in here are getting power. Power is good. And this little light just tells me that it's running. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off because I don't need to run my power bill up. But as you can see, that is the way to do it. This is estimated time. This is not the temperature that your kiln, that you want your pots to fire at. Do not. So if you want an 06 firing, do not put an 06 cone in here. Put an 05 cone in there. Go one cone higher. Right? This is a backup. This particular kiln is designed for you to actually still physically fire it. It just gives you backups in case it reaches temperature before you come back in and your estimated time, you check your estimated time and you check your cones. That sometimes happens. You know, if you put new elements in there and you're going off of your older firing, you may find that your cones fire out or that your kiln fires a little faster, and that's okay, that happens, which is why you have the estimated time and you have this kiln sitter. They are only there as backups. These do not fire the kiln. Do not rely upon these to get you to your temperature. I don't care what anybody else says. You read the instruction manuals, they will tell you these are backups. You have to physically be actually coming out here and looking into your peepholes. That's why we have these holes here, so we can look into them and see the cone. Pick this one back up. The cone that is in there. All right. When you set it, you want to set your cones so that you can see them through the peephole. If you can't see your cone through the peephole, your cone is not doing its job. You have to be able to look at it through the peephole to see when that cone bends. If you don't see that cone bending, guess what? You don't know when to turn your kiln off. And if you rely upon this timer or this kill sitter to turn your kiln off, you're again not using the tool properly. Sorry to say it, you're not using the tool properly, but you're also giving up control over your firings, over your clay. And if you want to get repeated success from this kiln, from any kiln, you have to do the work. As I said, as I recently read, cows don't milk themselves. Kilns don't fire clay by themselves. They require your input. You have to get in there and you have to look. You have to see, where's that cone bending at, right? Using this is just a guard in case my time goes up. Now, once you get it all set and you're firing it, well, you will be able to use these in conjunction with these and your timer, and you'll be able to actually come back out within 10 minutes of it shutting itself down and actually be able to probably get your cone fired correctly. But that doesn't last very long. Kiln sitters are quite an interesting little beast in that it is just a sensing rod that's weighted and pushes down, and those rods are adjustable and need to be adjusted for appropriate use. Just like as we saw with, pull this one out, with that cone. As we saw with these bending, here I have one that is actually bent, right? And here's this one. You can see where the rod sits on the piece and it bends down, but again, it is one of those things. It's like, if I put it too far back or if I put it too far forward, it's going to adjust temperature again. It's going to be like, well, it's going to have either more weight from the bar resting upon it. You see the little bends there, it's the way the bar rests. It's going to have more weight resting upon it or less weight, just depending on where you put it. Physics is coming in here, right? And that will actually even adjust the firing. So these aren't reliable for telling you what your temperature is in the kiln. Only this is reliable. In fact, let's go over here. I've got a few from this direction over here. Sorry about my hand being in the way, but I actually have one of these pulled aside so that you can see what it looks like on the inside. Take it back over here, set it down on top of my kiln shelf. Dun, dun, dun. I know, shouldn't do this, but you know what? It'll be okay. They will tell you don't use your kiln lid as a table, and you should not use it as a table, because you get to the habit of stacking things on top, you will find that you may forget about them. You may set something on fire. Bad things will happen. And if you'll notice, this is that same Model LT 3K system that's on this piece here. It has its timer. It has its switch. This is what they look like from the backside. Okay. So here's where the timer counts down. It gets its power from the kiln. Your main wires are good button there. But that's not really what we want to look at. We want to look at this sensing bar. Okay. And they do come in different lengths depending on the thickness of the kiln, along with the box. This one came out of one that's very much similar size. But this sensing bar right here, this is what gets the weight. And you have to adjust it. And if you notice, when you get in here, there's adjustments that can be made on these things. See that little bar right there? It comes out through the end. You can make adjustments to this. It's got a little adjustment screw there. Now, if you go to Orton's website, you'll find that they actually do have an adjustment tool so that you can adjust this and have it be in the middle spot and be balanced. Now, this is an old one I took off of a kiln I was turning into a gas kiln, so I'll probably never use it again, but I keep it around for the spare parts in case anybody ever needs one. But again, tired of seeing all of these people going, I don't know how to fire, and then I just set the time and it hit time, but my kiln didn't go off, and I just don't, because you just don't know how to use it. So it's easy to learn how to use it. Now, whenever you look at a kiln, by the way, and you see one of these, model LT3K, that has nothing to do with what kiln it is. It has nothing to do with is it a phase, is it a two-phase or a three-phase kiln, a single-phase kiln? It has nothing to do with that. All it is this is just this particular model. It is the LT3K comes with the timer, and it comes with the kiln sitter, and there you go. That is what LT3K means. If you want to know what your kiln is, now this particular one, Duncan actually puts, this one is a DK716-2. Duncan makes it pretty easy to find the numbers on their old kilns. But if you can't find the number, then you come over to this side and you will find all of your information that you need right here. This will tell you wattage, it will tell you, excuse me, it'll tell you wattage, it'll tell you your amps, so you'll know what electricity you need to run to this particular kiln. This one, let's see, oh, this little guy is, this one is a 15 amp, I believe. Yeah, this is a 15 amper. And that just means that, so because it's 15 amps, what that means is that the kiln the wiring that I have in here, that has to be more than that. I can't just put a 15 amp on there. It's got to be about, this one actually runs, this particular model runs a 25 amp circuit breaker on there. But there you go. That's a basic way of looking at these kilns and running them. You can't set it and forget it. You have to use cones. If you do not use cones, I can't help you. You have to use cones. This is where you control your temperature. You should always be physically being the one to turn this off, not letting the timer turn it off if you can avoid it, and not, yes, the kiln sitter, if it's properly set, will drop, but you might also find that it might not be properly set. So you have to do those adjustments. If you find as you're doing your time and you find that your estimated time isn't enough, you can always add time to the timer. This dial will allow you to keep turning it while the kiln's running. There's nothing that stops it from doing that. Anyways, I think that's about does it as far as time goes on using one of these. But again, learn to use it. If you don't want to buy the manual, you don't want to find the manual online, even though they're all there, just remember the kiln sitter gets one cone hotter than the cone temperature you want to go to as a starting point. The timer is just there for an estimated time. You, the potter, need to always be there to check your cones through the peephole. Here's the peephole. So that you know when to turn this kiln off based upon the bend of this cone. I can't make it any more simpler than that. If you have questions, you can drop them in the comments below. Other than that, go have a great day and make something out of clay.